Okay, good evening, everyone. We're going to get started. I want to welcome everyone and thank you for coming out to our forum, our informational forum about the new planned school project for Easthampton. We'll start off with just sharing with you the agenda for tonight. We'll have a greeting shortly from the mayor. Nancy Follinsby, superintendent of school, and Dale Doran, our business manager, will give a program overview. Our architects and project managers will give us the options that we've considered over the last 2 years and the plans that we have arrived at, and the mayor for Q&A from the public. I do want to start by taking this opportunity to once again, I know I've done this in each of these forums, but I'd like to once again introduce the members of the school building committee to all of you. And myself, Chair Tom Brown, Nicole LaChapelle, Mayor, Nancy Follinsby, Superintendent of Schools, Dale Doran, Director of Business Services, Melissa Zawadski, City Treasurer, Cynthia Kwasinski is the Chair of our school committee, Larry Carnes, the Director of Maintenance, Judith Averill is Principal at Maple, Dave Motter, Fire Chief, Marion Goldstein is now a school committee member, John Atwater, Dan Carey, City Councilor, Pat Bruff, Dave Boyle, Deb Lusnia, and Shannon Dunham, also a school committee member. Also, in addition to the committee members on the stage tonight, we have Mel Obermeyer, who is with Colliers, our project management team, along with Alan Minkus, who's hiding over there because I couldn't remember his name at the last forum. And also we have Bert Gardner, who is our project architect. Bert's over there. I want to thank all of you, the committee members, and all of our advisors, mayor, superintendent, Dale. I want to thank all of you for your efforts in this process over the past 2 years of meetings and reviewing volumes and volumes of information. I'm not even sure the committee can appreciate all of the work that went into this project early on by the school department, volumes and volumes of information to determine the educational need, the educational basis for this project. And bringing all of that forward to come up with the best possible solution to provide a facility that will support 21st century learning for all the students of Easthampton. Tonight marks our 5th public forum and our continuing effort to provide the residents of Easthampton with all of the information that is available to us to date. We will have time, as I said earlier, at the end of tonight's presentations to answer your questions, and all of the information you see tonight in the PowerPoint presentation will be available on the district's website. Please note that our 6th, and I think our 6th public forum is scheduled for Tuesday, May 1st at 6:30 at 50 Payson. Each one of these forums along the way over the past 2 years have served to kind of tighten up the information a little bit as we move forward. So at this time, I will turn it over to Mayor LaChapelle.
Thank you very much, Tom. And thank you all for coming tonight. The process, I was explaining this to some folks who had stopped by my office to actually talk about education in Easthampton and the need for a new school. And they had a few children with them, one very small, one maybe mid-elementary range, and then an older teenager who looked very impatient that he was at all in my office. Developmentally appropriate. And when we were talking about schools, I thought about this very process, and that it's very similar to the development of a child. It's a developmental stage as we're going through what our community needs, what it should look like, how we're going to get there. But at this part of the process, and we're going to see this tonight, is a developmental step forward of why. Why do we need a school? Why do our children need a school beside deserving? And why do we, for a bright future, need a new school? to focus during this process, especially at this time, about the whys, and then define clearly the project and the schematic, and then go forward to the hows and the whats are in that building is key. And I need to congratulate not only the folks on this committee, but also members of the community. Whether you are at this point for or against this project, the conversation has been vibrant and somewhat pointed, but urgent and needed. And the result will be a new school, pre-K-8 school, that serves the children of our community generations going forward and reflects the resiliency and grit of our school. Thank you for the opportunity to open the forum, Tom.
Thank you. I believe Nancy is up next.
I'm up next to talk about the need. So, why do we need a new pre-K to 8 school building? Well, all of our elementary schools, as many of you may know already, are over 100 years old, Maple, Center, and Pevin schools. They have antiquated mechanical systems, they're inefficient and costly to run. They have very limited outdoor play and learning spaces. Asphalt playgrounds are what we have at our elementary schools. There's overcrowding. We are using stairwells for little instructional groups. We're using rooms in the basement for instruction. We really do not have enough room to do all of the things that we need to do to educate our children. And we have no room to expand the buildings because they really are locked by neighborhood residential areas. There's inadequate parking. I'm sure if any of you have brought children to our elementary schools or picked them up, you know what a nightmare that is. There's no place to park and the cars line up, and it's really not a situation that we believe is safe for our students or our families. White Brook Middle School is 45 years old and with failing building systems. I think many of you may know that this winter we had to shut school down for a day because our heating system shut down. Our heating systems are so old that we can't even get parts for them now. We have to have parts made. So it's very challenging and very expensive to continue to maintain our buildings. There's poor energy efficiency. White Brook is the largest consumer of electricity in the city, and one of the handouts out on the table is about utility costs in the district. The middle school was also built back in the 70s when the open classroom design was popular. We're not sure why anyone thought that was a great idea. There are no walls in our classrooms, so the noise carries from one classroom to another. Kids have to walk through one classroom to get to another to get out of their pods, and it's just not a really workable situation. And our existing buildings, none of them meet current standards. So we're trying to prepare our kids for the 21st century world. And we're trying to do that in schools that were built to prepare kids for the 1800s. We're trying to give our kids 21st century educations in schools that were designed for 1800s education. Our schools don't comply with current building space standards and codes. So those are some of our problems with our current schools, and that is our need. So we have, ever since I've become superintendent, and before that, we've been pursuing an MSBA grant, a Massachusetts School Building Authority grant. And in order to do that, you have to put in a statement of interest. And when you put in a statement of interest, you have to identify the school that you are putting in a proposal for as your priority school. For the first 2 years that I was a superintendent, I put in a statement of interest for White Brook Middle School. With the encouragement of the mayor at that time, Mayor Tautznick, based on the high costs of utilities at the middle school. But because our middle school, in terms of some of the other schools in the state, is not one of the oldest middle schools, we simply weren't even considered. So in year 3, I decided that, at least to get considered, I would put in a statement of interest for every one of our schools, knowing that our 100-year-old schools should have some interest by the School Building Authority. So I put in statements of interest for all 3 elementary schools and the middle school. And again, I had to identify a priority school, so I chose Maple School. Maple School doesn't have its own cafeteria, it doesn't have its own gymnasium, it is very crowded, it has an asphalt playground, and I thought surely this would be a school that they would want to take a look at. And sure enough, they did. So they came out because they were interested in looking at our school for a grant project. And when they came out, the mayor and I met with the team that was sent to talk with us. And at that time, and I've been thinking about this for a long time, I thought, well, you know, what about if we could consolidate our pre-K to 4 grades? Would they consider that? Because they're all about the same era in equally dire shape. And so I asked them, and they said, yeah, as long as you've got the school that is your priority school as part of the project, you can do that. You can put that in. We don't decide, you decide, as long as Maple School is part of the project. So I've said this many times before. At that point, I felt emboldened to ask, well, what about a consolidation of our elementary schools with our middle school? Knowing how much our families who were in our middle school wanted to have better facilities for their children. And knowing that to give new facilities to just one age group of children in our community just didn't seem to be fair or equitable. And so again, I was told, yes, as long as Maple School is part of that project, you can consider the pre-K to 8. And so that's the proposal that we put in at that point in time. And that's kind of how we got here.
So we are currently at the end of the feasibility study. Very early on, this was a year ago this past fall, after the design team was assembled, we engaged in a process called visioning. And it was a 3-day set of exercises spaced throughout the fall that involved over 30 stakeholders representing the mayor, school district administration, teachers. We had a couple of middle school students involved in that process, as well as parents and other community members. And the purpose of the exercise, which was guided by an educational consultant that works with the architectural firm, was to really think very deeply about what we wanted this new school to be able to do, how we wanted it to deliver educational experiences to the children of Easthampton. And over those 3 days, we looked at all aspects of educating pre-K through 8 students in Easthampton and came up with a vision of how we want this new facility to work for the schools and children in the community. That process served as the foundation for the superintendent's drafting of an educational program, which was the very first step in starting to think about the design of the building. You started from what the educational program needed to look like, and it was the visioning that provided the data that that plan could be written from.
Once the program was determined, the educational program, and submitted for approval to the MSBA, the MSBA then challenges the project group to come up with ways to address that educational program. And it is prescribed by them that they really want a broad look at what the possibilities are in terms of solving that educational program. Specifically, they require that we looked at the Maple School and what sorts of things could be done to it to simply repair it, and how did that address issues related to the educational program. Likewise, as Nancy had suggested, the MSBA in this case allowed Easthampton to look at a consolidated school of pre-K to 4, which would include all 4 of the 3 elementary schools, and how the educational program would work in a solution that involved that consolidation. And then lastly, also as Superintendent Fowlsby said, was the option to look at the a pre-K to 8, a fully consolidated pre-K to 8 facility that obviously all of these three alternatives, you might say, had to include Maple. No matter what we did, it had to include Maple because Maple was the key building that was identified and approved by the MSBA to address in this program. Within the alternative of the pre-K to 8 process, they also wanted to look at possibilities of how to solve that problem. The three or four actually that are listed here as alternatives E1 through E4 identify different approaches to satisfy the educational program in a pre-K to 8 solution. The first one being what we considered a minor addition, a minor addition and major renovation. In other words, keeping Whitebrook, using Whitebrook, since it was the only site that really could be logically expanded in any way, and keep as much of the building as at all possible with minor additions to address the program issues. So that was alternative E1. E2 was to take a similar approach to Whitebrook, but to do a major addition and minimize the renovation. In other words, tear a good portion of Whitebrook down and put on a relatively large addition. The third option was a completely new pre-K to 8 building. This option basically retained the existing athletic field that you may be aware of in the back of the back of the Whitebrook site, and to keep the Whitebrook building operating while the new building was being built. E4 came about because it was determined finally that by keeping and restricting the design to keep the athletic field where it was, actually created and cramped the project where it really just didn't work very well, and ultimately was going to cost more than actually rebuilding the athletic field in a different location. So as you can see by the total cost in that second column, a simple repair, which didn't address any of the, you might say, programmatic issues that the district had come up with as an educational program, was going to cost about $22 million, with the district's portion being about $9 million. But again, it only addressed repairs to the building and some code violations that exist there, but really didn't improve on the space conditions. Alternative D, the new pre-K to 4, actually would be $60.5 million. It did address it would replace actually Maple Center and Pepin, but would not have addressed Whitebrook. This alternative would have placed a new building alongside of Whitebrook for a pre-K to 4 program and keep Whitebrook as the middle school, grades 5 to 8, as it exists now. Therefore, that alternative didn't benefit at all the middle school, the grade 5 to 8 population. And then lastly, the four alternatives that I listed, you can see the numbers there vary from pretty close together, actually $107 million to $109 million, $112 million actually. The first two options really compromised the program because we were trying very hard to keep the existing Whitebrook building. And as Nancy had mentioned, this building is problematic in both the way it's designed and its energy efficiency and all sorts of things. So it actually ended up being as much or close to as much or more, depending on how much of it you tore down and replaced, than actually building a new building. So therefore, alternative E3 and E4 E3 came to light as the $109 million option, which is the new pre-K to 8 building, and then E4 with just moving the building around gave us the best value. You can see what's referred to here as the net reimbursable rate. The actual rate that MSBA allows, reimbursement rate, in other words, for every dollar you spend, they would reimburse the base rate. We are now working at 62.3. 62.3% a reimbursement. However, not everything in these projects is reimbursable. There's various asbestos issues, and there's site limitations and cost per square foot. So ultimately, and it's a very complicated formula and spreadsheet that they work through to do that, but what this column does, the net reimbursement rate actually takes all that into consideration in defining the cost of these projects, and determine then what the net rate, after you've considered all the non-reimbursable rates, into the process. And again, it varies. Even though the reimbursement rate is very high on the base repair, you're not really getting very much for the project itself. So it varies, and it's right around the 45 to 46%. With that, it became very clear to the committee that, and in evaluating these sorts of things, these are the sorts of things that were considered in then, okay, we need to decide which direction to go in. And the committee had worked on that for quite some time. You can see where the the total repair, if you looked at all four of the schools, Maple, Center, Pepin, and Whitebrook, to just repair all four of those schools individually was going to cost $135 million, which is, as you saw earlier, is much more than the 109 to build a brand new school. The MSBA will only participate in one of those buildings at a time. In other words, under this program, we could repair Maple, but that would be the only, it's going forward with the repairs, that would be the only repair project that would be eligible under this current program. And then each of the other buildings would have to be taken up and submitted in separate applications in the future. None of these repairs would, as I mentioned before, replace provide the facilities for the 21st century learning or establish the educational program that the district really is set out to achieve for really their schools as a whole. And they would not meet the MSBA space standards, and when or if MSBA would invite a third, in other words, a third Easthampton project is unknown. We've got the Easthampton High School, which has about an 8-year spread between when it was submitted and now when we got the approval for this project. So there's at least that eight-year span, and then it's unknown whether MSBA would offer a third one or not. The new pre-K to grade 8 school, as I mentioned, is the $109 million, and going through those calculations that I mentioned that the MSBA does would leave a district portion of $59 million. And of course, just to put it in perspective, as we all know, costs always go up. They don't go down with inflation. The cost of the Easthampton High School in 2013 was $43.7 million. In today's cost, that would be $60 million in 8 years based on current inflation rates, with the probability that inflation rates may be going up in the future, but who knows related to that crystal ball. But you can see how much escalation can take place over that period of time.
Mel, I would just want to reiterate one point, because it might scare me when I see the word estimated cost of $109 million. We have committed to this project will not exceed $109 million. It could be lower, but it will not be higher. So whether that means cutting back if bids come in too high, we won't know until the bids come in. That's why the question that's on the ballot does not have a dollar figure. That question is set by state statute. It simply authorizes the mayor to borrow the funds necessary to build a new school. That process comes later. The check and balance is when the city council has to actually authorize the exact amount of the bond after we're through the bidding process. But this is not going to go over $109 million.
Some questions that came up from the committee specifically said, well, what are our other, if we're really looking at the Easthampton schools in their entirety, what other sort of options are open to us? In other words, if we really just did a repair of the, let's say the Maple School now, because we have that opportunity, and we put off repairs for the other schools in the future, what could it look like? As one option, you know, what would happen with a pre-K to 4 project, and how does that all compare to the pre-K to 8? So what we did is we threw together a couple of scenarios, and there, trust me, there are a number of scenarios one could go through that would mix and match all sorts of different options, but this sort of bookends, you might say, the various options out there, just to repair the 4 schools. In other words, you take the repair program, right now I should say, you take advantage of the existing program to fix Maple, which would give you a fair reimbursement rate on that, but then to make it reasonable within a period of time, the MSBA has another program called the Accelerated Repair Program, which is limited excuse me, to building systems only. And those building systems are boiler replacements, roofs, and exterior windows and doors. They don't cover program space changes, however, the program is much more accessible, you might say, on a timely basis as opposed to the major program, which is what we're approved for right now. So with that assumption, I simply made an assumption that, okay, if we do Maple now, we could finish that in 2021, and then every 2 years beyond that, let's say that we could get an accelerated repair project that would address the other 3 schools. But only those systems that, or I should say the MSBA would only contribute to those systems as I just mentioned. But to do that, again, you can't do more than one building at a time, and it would take a couple of years for it to go through a process. So the soonest you could have, based on that scenario, the soonest you could have gone through that process would be opening in 2027, and actually that cost would be $135 million compared to our $109 million for the new building. With the district portion even much higher, because the MSBA would only be participating in those systems that I just mentioned. Scenario 2, on the other hand, says, okay, what if we do a pre-K to 4 building now? We would take all 3 of the elementary schools offline, replace it with a new pre-K to 4 building, but that would leave Whitebrook to be dealt with in the future. Now, Whitebrook, to be fully funded, you might say, or considered by the MSBA, has to go through another one of these statement of interests that Nancy had mentioned, and is likely to take about 8 years. That's what it took between the high school and now to get approved for this program. So with the assumption that it would take another 8 years to get a statement of interest approved by the MSBA, would put this, a new grade 5 to 8 school, which would replace Whitebrook, opening in somewhere around 2029. So basically another 11 years to get the full population of the schools addressed in terms of facilities. And that would cost $145 million, with an $80 million portion being borne by the district. And then finally, the comparison, this is the one that we just showed you earlier. The new pre-K to 8 can open in 2021. It will have taken care of and addressed all 4 of the schools, the 300-year-old elementary schools, as well as the 1970s Whitebrook School, for a total of $109 million, with Easthampton's share just shy of $59 million, with a 46% reimbursement rate. So, with all of that in consideration, the school building committee, and I typically don't like to read things, but I'm going to read this. At the conclusion of the analysis, all of the options considered, Easthampton School Building Committee concluded a new pre-K to 8 school is the one best option to meet the educational needs of the community and represents the best long-term value for the city of Easthampton.
As Mel indicated in his summary of the options, and most people are aware, the proposed school is going to be located at the Whitebrook site. So in making this decision, the school building committee did evaluate a lot of the considerations and the benefits of the site, considerations to the soil conditions that people are aware of.
You want this? Sure, it might be easier. Sorry.
As well as traffic concerns at the entrance of the school. They've evaluated that. They also looked at several of the benefits. Compared to where your elementary school students are right now, this site is a vast improvement. Connection to nature is a big component that the school district would like to incorporate into its curriculum. Whitebrook is a beautiful scenic site. It's got access to nature trails, vernal pools, streams, all kinds of outdoor opportunities for students. And just as importantly, Whitebrook is a city-owned property right now. So by developing an asset that the city already owns, they save the cost of land acquisition and unknown developmental costs for that. Building organization is something that was discussed as early as the visioning process that Dale had.
Do you want to go back to that slide for 1 quick minute?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
So just kind of joining with what Bert just talked about briefly, the traffic conditions at Whitebrook now are, they can be challenging. It's foreseeable with the addition of 700 new students on the site that we have some traffic mitigation and calming problem solving to do going forward. And that's something not only does this committee see, but also members of the community have already jumped on, as well as our city departments. The cars, I would remind folks that these cars who are driving students to and from school are already on our roads, and regardless of where the school is placed, we would have some serious traffic mitigation to take a look at. The fact that it's at a known location where there are students already and that we know the pluses and minuses of the traffic situation at the top of the road, I feel is to our benefit. It's something that our DPW and highway departments know well and are at the ready to provide not only answers, but bring up past solutions that may or may not have worked. The other thing that will be coming forward soon is a full traffic study for public review. And the problem solving really begins then when we see exactly where our challenges exist. As you can imagine, the beginning and the ending of the school day will be a primary focus for this part of the project. I'd also like to say there's a nice tie-in with the visioning process here and connection to nature. Superintendent Follansby, as well as members of the school district's Wellness Committee, have already started looking at extending bike path and accessing programming and support from safe routes to school, where students are going on the bike path or using pedestrian pathways to their school that should also mitigate traffic. We have a couple of other considerations to look at, including expanding bus zones and also surveying parents and families of what their new arrangements for transportation will be to this site. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm also going back to the visioning building organization. The overall organization of the building was kind of established during that process when we were getting feedback from the stakeholders in the community about what they wanted a school that served pre-K to 8 population to look like and how it wanted to support that population. Separate neighborhoods to establish elementary school and middle school communities are established and serviced on opposite sides of the building with a buffer of shared program space in the middle. The way the building is organized allows that shared program space to be used after hours so that the classroom and academic portions of the building can be locked down and isolated. I've talked in the past about some of the programmatic requirements for it. 5 classrooms per wing, shared gymnasium space, but subdivided and accessed from opposite sides. The nurses suite is in the middle of the shared program area, so that elementary and middle school students have their own waiting areas. And then another topic that kind of comes out of the organization of the building is security, and certainly a popular subject these days, unfortunately. But the building in general has been very thoughtfully planned with security in mind. As I indicated, and everyone's aware, it's an increasing concern in schools. The isolation that we established for after-hour programs also works to the security advantage of the students in the school. In a lockdown situation, all of the classroom wings can be isolated. The doors can shut and lock, preventing access into the classroom wings at all. There's also mitigation strategies that put in place as far as specialized glazing and all the windows and entrances that are below 7 feet. We've got a thoughtful arrangement on how the offices are laid out. I met with this school resource officer late in the fall, early winter, and discussed the overall organizations of the plan. He had some good suggestions for me that I tried to incorporate. And then as recently as this past week, we met with the police chief and some of his expert staff on the school environment, and continue to develop the plans with security in mind. Looking specifically at how the building is accessed, both entrances give a view out to the parking lot so that people can see who's approaching the building before they get to the building. The exterior doors of the vestibule will always be unlocked during the day, but the interior doors of the vestibules will be locked during the day. In order to gain access to the school, visitors will have to buzz themselves, or basically ring a bell, identify themselves, and be admitted into the office area. At the office, they'll sign in, state their purpose, and then if it's appropriate, they'll be released to go to their destination within the school.
Bert, before you jump forward, I'm just going to throw you off track for a moment. I know we have our 2 public safety chiefs here tonight, Chief Alberti and Fire Chief Motter. If you guys want to weigh in for a moment, I know you've had a chance to review the plans, make some recommendations. Come on up to the mic. I know it's facing us. You can turn it around to speak to the crowd if you'd like to. We've been fortunate to have Chief Motter on the committee from day one. But obviously, as Bert said, with the unfortunate situations going on in the world today, security was top of mind for us.
Good evening. My name is Bob Alberti. I'm your police chief here in Easthampton. Excuse me. This past week, we met with Bert, the architect for the building, myself, and one of my officers, and my SRO. I'll give you a little background on at least where we are with regard to our training and how prepared we are for one of these unfortunate events. Hopefully it never happens here. Officer Kyle Gribby, who is one of my 4 to 12 officers, is in a program, a training program called ALERT. It's Advanced Law Enforcement Rapid Response Training, and it's a program that is putting everybody from one end of the coast across the U.S. to the other end, law enforcement particularly, on the very same sheet of music. So when we all respond, and we have neighboring towns coming in to a hostile event response, we're all doing the exact same thing. The left hand knows what the right hand's doing in these situations. We are very fortunate that we opted in very early. We're one of the first departments in Massachusetts to adopt this program. And Kyle Gribby travels the country training and teaching other patrol officers and staff the ALERT program. So he's the resident expert. We're very fortunate to have him. He's such an expert that other agencies across the country are recruiting him to come do their training. So with that, Officer Gribby, myself, the SRO, met with Bert and Superintendent Follansby this past week. And although Bert did say he met with my SRO, Rick Rogalski, early on, it was important at this stage to introduce some of my input and certainly Officer Gribby's input at this stage of the game. So with that, we went over a lot of material and a lot of suggestions that some of which Bert had already had, and then we were going to incorporate at least the ideas for this school. So that's kind of a long-winded version to tell you that this 21st century school is going to make your kids safer than these 100-something-year-old schools that we have now. Particularly, one facility for us is much more manageable by way of our response, and I'm sure Chief Mater will weigh in as well, the fire department's response. It equals accountability, it equals response coordination, and it equals isolation in the event that we have an event there. I have one school resource officer. Currently, he's assigned to 5 different schools. I'm sure most of you saw today that one school resource officer, one particular school, probably saved a lot of lives. But we have one school resource officer in 5 schools, and with the singular school, it makes more sense for the protection and security of the kids. So we went down through a litany of items from our perspective, from a security and keeping your kids safe perspective, most of which Bert touched upon. But at the end of the day, for us, it's going to be the 21st century technology that's going to keep your kids safe, and our ability to isolate and respond to one singular place. If we had an incident at Whitebrook right now, at the same time we had an incident at Maple Street or an incident at Center Pepin, it's going to completely deplete my resources right out of the gate immediately. This model will give our officers an opportunity to be much more effective from a security perspective in one location.
So from the fire point of view, a couple of the key items with a new school. The first for me is the Whitebrook Middle School is not fully protected by sprinkler systems. Only what's considered the assembly area, the office, the auditorium, the music room. The rest of that school does not have sprinkler protection. There's not a lot to burn in that school, but what can burn can grow rapidly and creates toxic smoke, which children who do not have the protection that we're afforded would not survive. A new school would be fully sprinklered, every bit of it. Some of the hostile threat events that have taken place across this country have revolved around attempts to burn. If we have a fully sprinklered school building, that threat's taken away. The other key with a new school, if you've ever been to any of our elementary schools or Whitebrook, when the fire alarms go off, it's a very loud, piercing sound. For children that are noise sensitive, when we do fire drills, we notify them before so they can either be removed from the classroom or hearing the protection devices put on. It is a real concern for a lot of students in our school district. The new system will mirror the one that's here. It's a voice with a very low-pitched alarm, and a voice simply saying, a fire alarm has been activated, please exit the school building. I've been told it compares to your favorite aunt tapping you on the shoulder and saying, honey, get out of bed and go to school. It's not something that we have to warn the students. If you've never been in a middle school, when we do fire drills, I can't, for probably half an hour, my ears are ringing, just walking the school, making sure it's evacuated. They're loud. That was the standard then. The standard has changed. The other problem is, with the exception of the high school, we get a fire alarm activation for any of the other buildings. We don't have an exact area. It might say water flow, or it might say smoke detector. We don't know where we're going until we get there. With only the best case scenario of 5 firefighters on duty, it makes it really hard to figure out. Look at the size of Whitebrook. We have to commit to the front of the building until we find out where that fire is and then relocate. That's a big school if it's in the back. This building, modern fire alarm system, before we leave the door, we know exactly what device has been activated and where it is in the building. So we can focus. If it's in here, we know we have 2 entrances, front and rear. If it's the gym, we know we're going to that door. So the new alarm system reduces our time to start interacting with and controlling the fire threat or smoke threat as compared to the other schools where we have to get there and go find it.
All right, thank you both chiefs. Sorry for catching you off guard 5 minutes before the meeting started. Great job, thank you.
There'll be a chance for questions after, but just kind of playing off of what Chief Motter indicated about the addressable fire alarm systems that let his department know where the fire is in the building. Part of the discussions that we had this past week at the police department is looking into similar technology for the police officers, so that if there is a situation at the school, they know before they get here where the threat is, and they can focus on that. So. Just starting to look at some of the concepts for the classrooms in the building. Really what it comes down to is a goal of creating a comfortable, flexible, and modern environment that encourages students to engage in the learning process. So making sure that there's views outside the building, making sure that there's plenty of natural daylight, making sure that furnishings are flexible, and that the rooms can be arranged in different ways to accommodate both lessons that are being given, small group work, and even just students that learn differently than sitting behind their desk still and quiet through the classroom session. There's furnishings now that allow students to move, to stand up without being disruptive. So all of those things are being looked at to make sure that we're getting flexible classrooms, and that as well that we'd have technology embedded throughout the building, so that no matter where you are, whether it's in the classroom or elsewhere in the building, technology will be readily available to the students to support the educational program. We've also started just taking a look at what this building looks like in 3 dimensions, and what the massing of this will be on the site. It's a school for just over 1,000 students. It's going to be a big facility, but we think that it's going to blend nicely in with the Whitebrook site and the backdrop of Mount Tom behind it, access to the nature trails that lead to Nonantuck Park. As we move on to the next steps, what we're looking at is building committee discussions about building materials. What do we want the envelope to be? What are our goals as far as sustainability, and making sure that the scale of the architecture relates to the students that are using the space. So we just put a few early concept sketches up there, but these all reflect the floor plan diagrams that have been developed to date.
Thanks, Bert. Just to talk a little bit about schedule. This is actually a slide that you saw in our last forum if you were here. It actually, we're still on target as we had laid out a couple months ago. We're now just finishing or just going into, I should say, what's called the schematic design phase, the SD phase of the feasibility study, with a submission going in July, and ultimately the MSBA giving its final approval in its board meeting in August, and obviously with the local vote, the Easthampton vote coming up on May 22nd. Assuming that all goes as planned, if the vote is approved locally, and we fully expect the MSBA to be fully supportive of the project, we would go into the final designs of the building and the site, and that would take place for over about a year's worth of time, so that early next spring or middle of the year, early summer, we would actually start construction, and the construction is likely to go on then for 2 years. One of the advantages of the current scheme is that it does not disrupt or require any demolition of the existing Whitebrook. It will continue to operate fully while we're in construction, and therefore when the new building opens, we simply move the students into the new building and then tear down Whitebrook and construct the new athletic field. This is much like the sequence that we undertook with the high school, where we built the new high school. Actually, it was pretty cheek to jowls right there, as you may remember, right next to the existing building. And then once the new building opened, we tore down the existing building and finish the site work. Just to give you an overall perspective, we likewise had a local vote in May. Then it was 2010, I believe it was, that we actually had the local votes. So we're very much on the same sort of timeline. It's again, from submission of statement of interest, as I mentioned earlier, till completion, it's about an 8-year process overall. So it takes a long time for these projects to develop. As you can tell, there's a lot of thought and a lot of preparation and a lot of milestones along the way. But we're very much in sync with, much like the very successful project of the high school, and anticipate it going accordingly. Mayor?
Thank you. Can everyone hear me if I sit back a little bit? Okay. I would like that. That's I cannot find my glasses right now. So a hot topic around the city and certainly in our committee meetings has been how exactly do we pay for something so important to the future of our city, and the hot word is bonding. What the bond will be, what it will look like, what the structure is. I would heavily suggest, as I learn more and more about this project and look at market conditions, is that there are subtle nuances to funding such a large, complicated project, and there is no sound bite to
It's the old one.
Oh, I was going to say, when I saw that.
Yeah.
I can keep talking.
I apologize. This is the one that we used from the last forum, and the mayor actually has a new one.
So the nuances of bonding and finance of such a project is exactly that. It's not a soundbite. It's not 140 characters on social media, but actually starts once we get an approved preferred schematic and we sit down with the school building authority and look at our financial agreements and put in important riders around things like the cost of steel. We look at the market timing. We look at right now what we've started as a very broad step back picture of bonding and make some high-end assumptions that the percent on any given bond might be 4%. It could be lower, it could be higher, but we're going to aim for a figure, an amount of money in bonding structure that gives us flexibility right now to respond to market conditions. Choosing different market bonding packages, and there's been a lot of conversation, a 20-year, a 30-year level principal product are all possible and options that I would consider. What is important to note here is that a product is one part of this equation. How the actual bonding goes out, perhaps the market conditions might indicate, might indicate that we borrow as we need. So maybe the first $10 or $15 million to get the raw materials on site. The possibility of going out and bonding once for $59 million is near impossible. Because why would we borrow money that we're not going to use all at once? So when we're looking at a project with a bonding instrument, say of a 20-year level principal or a 30-year hybrid, or something that's more similar to a home mortgage you look at, we all have to remember that the chunks of money we're bonding for will come in pieces. And the impact on the tax will have a range. And we will go through the process of paying this for the school over decades, looking at market conditions and maybe rebonding. We want to make sure that we leave ourselves an option at the end, towards the end of this project, to maybe save cost and watch our costs very carefully around change orders, around what maybe came under budget, or costs that we're able to shift in the course of construction. We don't actually go out to bond until August of 2019, maybe a little sooner, maybe a little after, but to start picking and giving you assurance of what product structure an interest rate that you can anticipate is something that would not be economically wise or feasible for me in my position as mayor, but also for you as residents. If anybody's going to build a house in 2 years, I don't think the thing you're thinking about right now is getting pre-qualified and signing onto a financial agreement of how to finance it with so many variables before us. I have been consulting with and will continue to consult with bond counsel, our financial consultants, our finance director, as well as the team that's on the stage before you. The range of tax impact per 100,000 is exactly that, a range, because we're looking at so many variables. Do I hope as we get close to May and into closer to our preferred schematics to have a little more information about this? I do. I'm also going to keep an eye on Twitter to see what happens with our steel tariffs. Well, why that sounds funny is actually a real impact on our project, and I would anticipate other major factors in construction to affect the decision going forward. And I think, as Tom mentioned, there'll be an opportunity for question and answer, so anything more specific, I'll be available.
So then we have anticipated benefits. If we look at improvements to teaching and learning, the first is equity of opportunity. All our Easthampton students would have access to a 21st century education. Our high school students have that now. It's time for our elementary and our middle school students to have that 21st century education. The needs of teachers and students have changed. We need to keep up with the times. We need to build a facility that is going to be responsive to our changing world. This will also align our academic groupings with district curriculum. It will provide full handicap accessibility for all students. We're going to build a state-of-the-art facility for community use, clustered and easily accessed recreational performance and dining spaces, an improved football field, and provisions for an improved running track. And most importantly, we are going to have a cost-effective solution over a long term. This will maximize the cost share by MSBA. We can't afford to pass up this chance. It's not going to get cheaper, it's going to get more expensive. And this is the best idea for maximizing our cost share. And it will retain city financial resources for community use. We lose so much money to choice and charter because parents look at our aging buildings. They don't come into the buildings, they don't necessarily meet the teachers and look at our programming. They see old buildings and choice and charter out. And a new facility will bring so many of those dollars back. And last, it will address the educational facility needs for a minimum of 50 years. That's money well worth spent.
Thanks, Cynthia. And just to reiterate some of the points that timelines, if you will, that Mel had touched on earlier. On April 10th, the MSBA board will approve our preferred solution. We have no reason to believe that they will not. We've been working hand in hand with them all through this process. Members of the team have been to Boston regularly, and they've made some great suggestions for improvements along the way. So we believe that on April 10th, they will approve that preferred solution. May 1st is our next public forum. That'll be at 50 Payson. May 22nd is the vote to put before the voters to approve, we hope, for the new school. And then schematic designs and MSBA approval by August 29th. And then the rest of it flows until we open the doors in 2021. I said we would be done in an hour. We're a minute over. But I think we started a minute late, so we're done in an hour. Before we open it up for questions, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of us up here from the committee. And, take an opportunity to introduce the committee at each of these forums. There are 11 other members, a lot of which are here tonight in the crowd, but I did want to give an opportunity, and I gave them a heads up earlier today. I didn't catch them off guard as much as I did the two chiefs. If any committee member would like to make a comment or two, feel free to come on up and make a comment. Don't worry, not all 11 of them I don't think are going to make a comment, and I asked them to keep it to a minute or two, except for Pat, because I know he can't keep it in a minute or two. Sorry, Pat.
Give or take, give or take. Well, I'll try to keep it within a minute or three.
Go for it.
Because I wrote it all down, so I won't wing it. Around 2 years ago, I'm Patrick Bruff, for anybody who does not know. Around 2 years ago, I was asked to work with 15 others on the school building committee. I was excited to work with great people from several sectors of the community on a project that I feel is needed. Some I knew and some I didn't, but what I have learned over the last 2 years is that all of them are dedicated, realistic, and have the well-being of the current and future students as well as the entire community in mind. The committee of many volunteers has dedicated countless hours of time to a process that we all knew could be for nothing at the end, and still we all knew it was something that we wanted to be involved in. Most of the committee members have or have had students come through the schools and know the buildings that we are trying to replace. We all have the same goal, and that is to provide quality facility for the future education of Easthampton. We all realize that through this process, there might be people who disagree with the direction that we have recommended. I have said to many people that it is very easy to pick apart a plan when you don't see all the information the committee has seen. It's easy to second guess when you think you have all the details from what you have read on Facebook or from folks not in the room doing the research. That is part of the process. That is part of the process that we expect. But we have to keep in mind that we are making choices based on what we know and what will be best for the citizens of Easthampton. Over the last 5 forums, you have seen lots of information. With that, you as a citizen of Easthampton will need to make a decision based on what 16 trusted people think is the best plan for our community. Every voter will need to take into account things like, can we as a community afford to ignore the 100+ and 98-year-old buildings age in hopes that they're going to last long enough? Can we afford to continue to teach students in buildings that are not up to 21st century learning standards? Can we afford to risk the ever-rising cost of construction and the reduction of state aid when it comes to building to pass this opportunity up? I, for one, know that we've always kept in mind during this process, we have a plan that does many things, including construct a facility that will last for decades to come, as well as being built keeping in mind that cost is a factor. We are not asking to build a luxurious building on the backs of the taxpayers of Easthampton. We also know if you want something to last, you're going to have to spend some money. I would not ask anyone to support this project if I didn't think it wasn't the right thing to do. Some have asked me, why do we need this project now? I would ask you, if not now, then when? I hope that everyone, having seen the presentation today and hearing the work that has been done, you feel you can trust me and the 15 others that have been part of this committee. If you still have questions, please talk to any one of us in the school building committee and we'll get you your answers. I want to finish quickly by just thanking our City Council, Councilor Owen Zarat, and the entire City Council for their vote of support recently that some of you may have seen in a recent resolution. Basically, the entire City Council agreed that this is the right thing to do. With that, I will be asking you to vote yes for the new school on May 22nd. And thank you all for your time. Thank you. Thanks, Pat.
I was actually hoping no one would clap because he'll just keep doing that. But thanks, Pat. That was great. Thank you. David.
Good evening. Thanks for coming out. David Boyle, committee member. I was on the high school committee. Just want to say a few things. it's a sign of the times, but it's really discouraging to see what's on Facebook about this project. Encouraging too, because some people have stepped up that I don't know who they are and said some nice positive things. But I just wanted to dispel one or two myths. This is a exhausting project. It's an ambitious project, K through 8, one big building. But through the committee, the consultants, and the MSBA, it's been thoroughly vetted. I went with a previous mayor, and Nancy and Dale, and Melissa Zadwaki down to Boston to 3 MSBA meetings. And that's one state agency, in all honesty, where everybody's getting value for their tax dollar. It's not one of those stifling, do-nothing bureaucracies. They're on the side of education. They're on the side of residents. 1 penny from our tax, our sales tax, goes into their fund, and that's where the money comes from for the reimbursement. So we're already paying a little bit for this stuff. 2 years ago, one of the meetings, one of the architects or consultants, and the MSBA is made up of architects, construction officials, labor officials. There's a fellow from Springfield who's very involved in masonry. He's on the board. It's diverse. But one of them spoke up about security 2 years ago and wanted to make sure that we were thinking about security. They're proactive. They're in the business of building schools. And they want to see us succeed. They don't want us to come back in 10 years. They want us to come back. They want us to succeed now. Lastly, a lot of us own homes. Not everybody does. But when you have a house and the roof starts aging, you can pass that roof on to the next person. You can sell your house as is, and that guy can sell that house as is. But at some point in time, someone has to replace the roof. Someone has to do it. Somebody. Or the house is going to fall down. And we're at that point now with the school. You know, I grew up in town. I lived on South Street. I saw Whitebrook being built. There's a lot of myths about Whitebrook. Everyone knows that the open floor plan and the construction wasn't the best. But Whitebrook was, the committee that worked on it was 1973. It was a reaction to a population boom that was unprecedented in Easthampton. 1968 to 1965, the town grew. The Plains section came online, and we had double sessions at the high schools. And in all honesty, I was 14 or 13 when Whitebrook was built, but grew up in a building family. 70s construction sucked. It was fast-paced. It was all about the buck. It was, they brought in crews from outside the state. It was wham, bam, get out of here. That's all it was. And even though it's heavy soil at Whitebrook, that is not the reason Whitebrook has its structural issues. The reason Whitebrook has got bad issues was it was just done quickly. It was a reactive project. It was not an 8-year project. And I hope you consider that. The high school, the original one, the one that was here before it was hooked down, that had a 3-year thought-out process in 1959. They went through the same thing we're going through now. Should it be on Brick Street? Should it be near Main Street? But the soils, they're all the same except for the plains. Lastly, though, in the end, I know for some people it comes down to the impact on the tax dollar. But as a building person, I cannot emphasize that it doesn't get any cheaper. We're in the end of a low interest cycle. My first mortgage had a rate of 8% in 1989. It went up to 11%. It came back down. Interest rates now are at 4%, 4.5%, and they're going up. Interest rates are secular. We're leaving the low interest rate environment. Steel, regardless of our chief executive, is going up. The buildings I'm building on Northampton Street, we're coming under budget, but our estimates are not what I thought they'd be. Construction does not go down. We benefited with this building for 2 reasons. We had a kick-ass contractor. Fontaine Brothers were very, very good. And unfortunately, we were at the beginning of a recession. So hopefully, we're all hoping that there's no more recession. We know that the economy is going to slow, but this will not get any cheaper. The former mayor says there are cheaper alternatives. I'll tell you right now, he's all wet. This doesn't want to pay. And we're here because he didn't want to pay. We could have had a new elementary school in 2000. The city council and the mayor did not want to put it on the vote. Here we are. This, last thing I want to say is when the public safety complex was built, it was $6.4 million. That was the last cheap building project. That would cost at least $14 million today. At least, if not 16 or 17. These aren't scare tactics. Construction gets more expensive. So, you want to pay it forward and help out the next guy, or just let the town go down the tubes? Thanks.
Anyone else on the committee? We will open it up to questions from the audience. If you'd like to come on up and ask a question of the group, we'd be happy to get it answered. If you come to this microphone, just turn it around for us. No, you can come to this one too, I'm sorry. Okay. Whoever comes up to this one should just turn it around, that's all.
Just tell me what to do.
You're doing great.
Thanks. So, I just had one question.
Who are you?
All right. Hi, I'm Michael Dow. I've been living here in Easthampton since 2006. Hi. I don't have kids, so to some extent this is this would be a good thing to have. But I'm a huge believer that in the value of education and making all of society better. So I am totally enthusiastic about having the best schools in Easthampton. And, even though I won't have kids benefiting from it, I'm still happy to pay for it. But just sort of one thing I thought of while you guys were talking about, while the chief of police and the fire chief were talking. Obviously, there's a lot of concern about school safety in the event of some kind of attack. But one thing I was wondering about is what thought has been given to unlikely but still possible natural disasters. As climate changes, we're going to have more tornadoes here in the Pioneer Valley. More like the ones that hit Springfield and Munson a few years ago. What sort of safety for the students will this school have? So that's just a question about that.
Bert?
So this is actually an advantage of new construction to an ad reno project. When you renovate a building, you have to come up to certain levels of compliance. It's a percentage of what the current code requirements are for seismic and wind and different lateral forces that act on your building.
You thought about seismic as well?
Absolutely. It's a code requirement that we do. And by building new, we have to meet today's standards. The code is brand new right now. We just adopted a new code in Massachusetts. And the codes are constantly evolving to address the changing conditions in the region. So the building will certainly be seismically designed. Really lateral forces, which it accompanies both seismic and wind. So, thanks, Bruce.
Hi, my name is Kate Hobbs, and I live on Park Street. I've lived in Easthampton since 2014. I appreciate you, Mayor LaChapelle, speaking to some of the traffic and transportation concerns. So as I live on Park Street, I actually live about 3 doors down from the entrance to Whitebrook. But I live on the side of Park Street, on the west side of Park Street, where we don't have a sidewalk. So one of the things that I love about where we live and that I love about Whitebrook, the site, and this proposed project is some of the outdoor space around the proposed site. So as it stands now, my wife and 2 little white dogs and our 1-year-old love to walk in the neighborhood and walk down the trails behind Whitebrook. But to cross Park Street to get to where there's a sidewalk or to get to the middle school, we feel like we're risking our lives because we live right behind this blind curve and there's no way to cross the street safely. So I appreciate that there'll be a traffic study. Yeah. My specific, my ask from my perspective would be more sidewalks on our side of of Park Street and or a light there or crosswalks so that my kiddo, when he goes to kindergarten at the new school, can actually walk to school safely, and we can feel good about doing that.
Well, hopefully your kiddo will also go to pre-kindergarten at the new school. A big proponent of that. And I think that you and I maybe had an email exchange, if not an in-person conversation, aside from the school, in sidewalks. And certainly the traffic study looks at pedestrian safety and options. And it's a challenging stretch of road. But that is one thing that I've heard over and over again, is how do you access it from Park Street safely as a pedestrian? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Deborah Lynn Scott. I've lived in Easthampton since 1995. I actually graduated from the old high school. I bought a home by myself in '06, actually on Park Street. But I live on Park Street near the Williston skating rink. So I appreciate the concern with the traffic at the entrance to Whitebrook. But also the concern for me is once people exit Williston's territory, they speed. They automatically go 40 miles an hour. I have concern with everyone now going to be bringing their kids past my house. I just feel concerned of people going too fast. I don't want the traffic study to just be at the entrance of Whitebrook. I want it to be from Wilson Skating Rink all the way to Whitebrook. Like, that would be my concern.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I think we could have, Chief, if you could do some radar tomorrow, we'd be all set over here. But in all fairness, the traffic study is looking at numbers of cars and how they flow. I think that is, in my opinion anyway, Chief, that's a separate issue if there's speeding going on the road, and we could simply ask for more patrols to try to calm. We're also looking at ways that we can calm that traffic too, but right now we're looking at just numbers of cars and how they move through the site and in and out. But definitely we can look at all those issues.
Tom, can I just
jump right in?
And I think that you and I had a conversation in the conference room one day, and that the chief was helpful in providing some monitoring. It's very difficult to do that across the city. Candidly, the traffic study that is being done and about to be completed is attached to the project and focuses on the relationship to the school. So I wouldn't want to put out there that we can extend the traffic study beyond the scope of this project. I do believe, and have asked a few folks who have looked at other traffic studies as well as the gentleman who is doing ours, the effect on traffic calming or possibility to calm traffic along that long stretch of Park Street and what's the relation. And in all fairness, in the opposite way, in the converse. So whatever traffic solution is at the top of Whitebrook, what will it do to your section of Park Street? And it's a concern. Am I, promising, a solution or for all of Park Street? No. And it's a reconfiguration of traffic in our city. But certainly know that it's a concern, and I hear you, and I remember our conversation.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Stephen Judd. To continue along the same line, I've been in Easthampton since 2012. I actually live on Button Road, which you can see in all the designs. It's the one street south of the park. I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and I look forward to walking them to school right at next street. Along with the traffic studies, when do you expect the traffic study to come out to be published?
All of the numbers are collected at this point, so it's just a matter of formalizing it into a document that's presentable. So within the next few weeks, certainly.
And then, for example, of any costs that are incurred, a new stoplight or a rotary or whatever would be designed, does that go into the project cost, or is that a city cost that's separate that would be paid for, separate from the bonding or else like that? Is there any determination of how that would be factored in?
So we possibly part of the project cost. It depends really what the impact of the traffic is and how closely it is wedded to the school project. So there are already some traffic considerations there now. Clearly, having so many more students go to that site is going to, have an impact. And looking at what the cost of the solutions could be, there'll be a range, and what makes sense for, first a school, but also safety for pedestrians and for the buses that are going in and out. So I don't have an exact answer. I think the traffic study is paid by the project right now and looking at the solutions and then parsing out what is existing traffic and what is related to the school project.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
You took most of my questions. I'm Beth Tiffany. I live at 190 Park Street, and I actually abut the property. It's very difficult to get out of my driveway now. It's a terrible corner. Seen the accidents, been in one. Coming off of South Street, trying to get onto Park Street to get home. I'm very concerned about the traffic. Before I vote on this, I want to know what is the impact and what's going to happen with that road. Who's going to pay for it? What about Whitebrook Road? Is that going to need to be improved? The sidewalk to Whitebrook. What are the costs of the road associated with the school?
I can start. I can start just by giving you a preview of what the traffic study revealed. And really what it revealed is that they grade traffic conditions kind of like you grade school papers, F being the worst, and right now I think it's at like a D, but putting the school there will bring it to an F. But the F, the real problem isn't, and it's all tied together, don't get me wrong, I'm not sidestepping this in any way by saying the real problem isn't the traffic that's going up and down Park Street, because any traffic that's coming onto Park Street is going to, affect the traffic that's already on it. But the real problem that drives us to an F is you've got so many cars trying to get out of a parking lot, making a left turn, that it's a long wait for the people making a left out of Whitebrook Middle School. That's where the real issue is.
South
now,
Street
of course,
onto Park Street.
What's that?
South Street onto Park Street.
South Street onto Park Street is a complicating factor, but the numbers are the people that leave the Whitebrook. Now, what that does is people are impatient. So if you've been waiting for 5 minutes, obviously you're going to try to get out when you see a break, and that's what's going to lead to issues with the normal traffic flow that's on Park Street or coming on to Park Street from South Street. So the solutions that are being looked at have, this is part of the reason why the mayor's got to kind of consider how much of it is a school project, how much of it becomes a city project. Because the solutions range from anything from a traffic light at Whitebrook, which really is more than just that because South Street is so close to the entrance, to traffic circles, to other mitigation scenarios that impact Park Street more significantly and the butters. So,
when I got, it wasn't a leap, but an idea that the traffic study was going to give us this kind of data before the report came out, and everything was synthesized into the document we'll all see. I did ask Berkshire Group to, at the end of the report, summarize some options and costs. And then I've already started conversations with our city planner, as well as our state representative around MassWorks money and what part of the project, the traffic, is attached to school project and not, and what the financing and funding options are. The one thing I recall that really made me curious about what the traffic study would say is this idea that if the traffic issue is concentrated to the level of this F rating, and it's in the morning or in the afternoon, to get a police detail out there, and that, it's like, okay, that's an immediate solution, and we can control it, we can look, and it was really clear that actually wasn't going to help. In fact, might block the traffic in other ways, and that there were better solutions. So I anticipate the solutions to be complex, like the project, taking in a lot of different variables, hoping, the traffic study is what's happening now and what's being counted, but then looking, for information from the school district around who will be on a bus, who will not be on a bus, maybe a parent survey of who's going to be driving and who's not, and how that changes, and trying to factor that into one, I imagine, 4 or 5 options we might get.
So you would have a range of options and costs before the May 22nd vote?
I don't know. The traffic study will come out. I'm not sure about costs.
What if it's going to cost $2 or $4 more million to fix the road so we can have the school there?
I mean,
Is that going to be a town, another cost to the town?
I mean,
Who's
roads
paying
and
for it?
infrastructure are a cost now. I mean, and to start the process to see if there's money available is important. I mean, that section of Park and with South is already on, a number of lists, and it's certainly not as prioritized as the school project would be. I mean, the focus of this process is creating a school rather than looking at a traffic solution, but it's up to me. It's up to me in the process to figure out what traffic solution I take on as a part of the school cost and intensified by the school. When those exact costs will be available, I don't want to say May 22nd or before May 22nd and that's not available. It's really technical.
I understand, but it's also important for the people in the neighborhood to know.
I agree. It's very important.
Yeah, I think just one thing, if I could add to that, Mayor, that the good news is we've heard that the mayor's committed to resolving the issue. So we're not just blowing it off. It is an issue probably 3 years forward when the school opens in 2021. But the superintendent also had talked about the surveys, talking to the parents about how they get their kids to school. You heard from a couple parents tonight who are now going to be able to walk their children to school who may have driven them before. So we're not even sure yet. I understand what the traffic study might be implying at this point. We haven't seen the final report yet, but there may be a shifting here of folks who today drive and may be able to walk. But the mayor is committed to resolving that. I'm pretty confident we will not have a resolution before May 22nd, but we do have a 3-year window here to try to come up with a resolution for that.
Yes.
Oh, and one other thought. Anywhere in the boundaries of Easthampton that we put this school will be a traffic concern. So if we were to put the school on Northampton Street, I guarantee you we would have a traffic problem concern. If we put the school on Holyoke Street, we would have a traffic concern. So it's part of what goes along with the project that we have to take a look at going forward. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is James Torrey. My main focus was the traffic, and I'm a crossing guard at Whitebrook, so I see this every day, and I really think that this should have been addressed long ago, not waiting till now to say, oh, we're doing a study and we're going to have answers for you. This should have been one of the major issues before this school was even. There's no doubt our schools are in poor condition. There's no doubt this is a fantastic project, but the traffic is killer on Whitebrook. I personally don't see how you can address it because there's houses all over it. The turns are horrendous. South Street coming down is bad. The left turn is a zoo. I see it every day. It should have been addressed long ago. It hasn't been. I don't think anybody here or anywhere else can not say we don't need something done and something done soon. This school system with the security, with the, seems like a great project. The traffic is my main concern as well as the building site. Anybody that's read Facebook has heard me say it's a swamp. And I don't see how you can change that. I really don't. I mean, yes, the modern engineer says we're going to put in fill and we're going to drive down, but we've already got problems at the high school. I've addressed it. I haven't heard what the results were. There's cracking in the foundations of this school in numerous areas. There's been other issues with this school because of its foundations. What is going to be the ultimate at Whitebrook that changes that? What guarantees are we going to have that 20 years from now, my grandchildren are not going to have a junk school like Whitebrook is right now with a massive tax bill? So I appreciate what the committee has done. I don't fault you people. I really think that we should have done more homework up front and had more answers for the people. The gentleman stated that we don't know what the committee knows, and he's right. The committee knows a lot more than we do, and that's kind of sad that it hasn't come down to the voter and say, okay, we looked at this, and this is how we're going to address it. We looked at the traffic, this is how we're going to address it. This is the guarantee from the engineer that in 20 years we're not going to have broken walls all over the place. So I'm voting no, and unless I hear something drastically change, I'm totally against what we're doing now for reasons that we don't have enough information. It hasn't been passed down. I truly don't think we looked at this in a voter's perspective. So that's my thoughts. Thanks.
So could I just ask Bert to jump in on, you're all set, Jim, thank you. Bert, if you want to jump in about the perceived issues at the high school?
Yeah, I'll do my best, but part of the Facebook comments kind of discredit because we're the architects of record here with a fee. But I will say that the first notification that we received that there were cracks at the high school was a week ago Thursday. By this past Friday, I was out on the site with our structural engineer for no fee at all. This is just asking my engineer to drive from Eastern Massachusetts and come out here and look at the building with me and give a structural evaluation of what was going on at the high school, not the middle school or the pre-K-8 project that he's being paid for. And he looked at it. We walked around the building. There are cracks in the foundation. There are hairline cracks and what's known as shrinkage cracks. As concrete cures, water comes out of the concrete, and because the surface conditions are different than the conditions within the foundation wall, the rate that the water comes out at the surface is faster than the rate that it's expelling from the core of the wall. It's known as shrinkage cracks. It's common to concrete. Put the reinforcing in the wall to try to minimize that, to hold it all together as best we can. But if you look at any foundations or any concrete really, concrete cracks as it dries. We put control joints in to mitigate that and to try to control where the cracks occur. But as many control joints as we put in, there'll always be a crack that finds another location or an easier path to follow somehow. The cracks on the exterior walls, and actually there's some on the interior walls that if people want to go around and examine the building, it's all in the tan cast stone material that's at the base of the wall. This is a non-structural material. It's a veneer. And the cracks really are occurring in a 4-inch high band. The units are 4 inches high, 4 inches deep, and 24 inches long. And it's kind of right at the center of that where there's a joint above it. In some cases, the crack, because cracks follow the path of least resistance, extends up through the vertical mortar joint that's above the crack in the 4-inch high unit. But it's all specific to this material. If you look, the cracks don't extend into the brickwork above, which would be an indication of movement in the wall. If the wall was settling, the crack would continue. It wouldn't stop just at the material or a couple of courses of masonry above. And cracks that are caused by settlement typically, they grow over time and they typically widen as you follow them up the surface, as the building kind of settles on one side and pulls away from the adjacent wall surface. Our structural engineer is fully aware that people will question what his evaluation is, but he's also confident that any structural engineer that's asked to come out and take a look at that would say that none of the cracking on this school building is structural in nature. And it's common to what you'd see in masonry construction or in concrete construction. Those materials, unfortunately, are not flexible, and they crack. We take measures. The control joints, I think, are 30 feet on center in this school, which was industry standard 30 to 40 feet. I think that we've put the required number of control joints in here, but cracks are going to find their way into the construction. I think if you look at any recently completed masonry building, looking for cracks, you'll be able to find them. Unfortunately, the important thing here is that the foundation cracks don't really require any maintenance at this point, other than to watch. But the masonry cracks, our structural engineer did put together a report, and it was supplemented by our office and then submitted to the district. And I believe it's available on the website, or will be. It will be available on the website so that people can read it. And there is a repair that's suggested for the masonry because we don't want masonry water infiltrating your masonry walls, because especially in New England with freeze-thaw cycles, that will become a concern that will lead to the deterioration of the building. Just a kind of a final note, I'm the architect of record on this project, and we do have a fee, obviously, as anyone has a fee for the services they provide, but I'm also an Easthampton resident. My children go to the schools here, and if I'm lucky, my grandchildren will, and my children aren't anxious to move away from me. but you know, I have an interest in the longevity of these buildings, bottom line. And one last thing, as far as the structural engineer, it's a state requirement that the structural engineering on these school projects is subject to a peer review. So a third-party independent engineer will review the structural engineering for the project before it's built.
And just before the next question, Nancy.
I just wanted to make one comment. If you didn't notice, on the table outside the auditorium, there's a packet called Commonly Asked Questions. And whenever we get a question like that, we try to research it. We don't try, we do research it, which is what we did with Bert, and provide that answer to our community. So if any of you have questions that have not been answered, you don't see them in the document, let us know and we'll get the answers for you. There's a brief answer, much briefer than what Bert just gave us, but we will be putting up the report from the engineer and a more detailed answer to the question about the cracks at the high school.
And I would just chime in about the information, and back to Pat's comment about the information that's been available to the committee. The reference really is that we've eaten, breathed, and slept this information for the last 2 years. Every bit of information we have is available on the district website. The point is, we don't expect folks to necessarily go out and study it verbatim the way we've lived it for 2 years. So we might know something about something to give an answer, but that information that was the source of that answer is available on the district website, just as this entire PowerPoint and every PowerPoint that's been done, all the information we've received as a committee is out on the district website. If anybody wants to take the time to study it, it's there.
I was just going to add, in that commonly asked questions, question number 5 addresses the concern that was raised about soils. So you can get a really good answer relative to any soil concern by reviewing that question.
So I think your point is good, though. If you have questions, to submit them. I think that with the question you raised about the cracks in this building it was stated that you'd read 600 of the 1,000 pages or something and hadn't seen an evaluation of the high school building. Well, that's because the high school building wasn't part of the study for a pre-K to 8 school. So we evaluated the elementary schools and did existing conditions reports on those, but not the high school. So if it's a question that you have, if it wasn't part of it and it's something we can answer, we'll certainly do our best to answer it, as we did with this, coming out to take a look at this building. We walked it with the maintenance director and our structural engineer to look at the cracks that were discovered.
Thanks. Jump.
Hi, good evening. My name is Kathy Hartley. I have been born and brought up in Easthampton. In fact, I was in 5th grade the year that Whitebrook opened, just to let you know how long I've been around. One question I have, I don't know if this has been answered before, but will the proposed K through 8, will the elementary and middle school students start and end their days at the same time, or will they be staggered?
They'll be staggered. We do have that in our commonly answered or asked questions, yes. Staggered start and end times, just like we have now.
Great, thank you.
Wes Hardy, a non-traffic question. So my first question is because I know this has been a long process, but back in March, the estimates were 100 to 156 million, and I know that the estimate had come down to the, I think, current 109 million, and I was just trying to get some clarity on like what had changed or why the reduction in the cost. If there, I don't know if there is an answer for that. I have like 2 others. Should I just like rattle them off in a row? So because the original estimate, so you might end up answering this question with the first answer, but because the estimate was higher originally, if there are cost overruns for the school, which I know that we don't want that, and no one's trying to have a cost overrun, but if for some reason there is a cost overrun, will the state, does the state reimbursement continue through a cost overrun? In other words, will they match if we hit a cost overrun? And then the last one's sort of like a wonky technical one, but the video surveillance for inside of the new school, I think, would be helpful, and it's going to go to the PD dispatch, but I have a security question about that in a different way. Are those going to be kept? Like, is I don't know if it's audio and video or just video, but are those going to be kept and maintained? And then are those going to be subject to, say, a FOIA request? So, I mean, I think a lot of people would kind of be a little uneasy if, there's some guy who knows from where who says, hey, I want the surveillance from inside the school. So I guess those are my 3 questions.
Okay. I'll give it a shot on the cost question, certainly. Yeah, early on, the various options are pretty broad. And therefore, we wanted to make sure we had a range that would capture all those options, because we didn't know, as in the early times, where we were going to be led to. And certainly, as the design is developed, we're more able to focus in on that. So that really has brought us down. The last thing we want to do, honestly, be perfectly frank, is to give you a low number and then have it go up. So the intent, because again, it was an educated guess, but they were pretty squishy at the early ranges. So we are now committed to this 109 million. In terms of what happens if we go over, the importance of this approval by the MSBA in August sets what is called the project scope and budget for the project. Once that agreement is set in August by the MSBA, we and as the project team and the city has to live by that. In other words, if the cost goes over and the city decides to go forward with the project, MSBA will still only reimburse the amount that they committed to in the project scope and budget agreement. Likewise, the scope is agreed upon. In other words, the MSBA is agreeing to pay for a very specific scope of building of this size and of this quality with a site layout that we've got for that price, $109 million. We are obligated to provide both of those, both the scope and the budget. If those things vary, then it comes back to the city to pay 100% of whatever that variance is. So that's the way the MSBA grant process works. We have had great success. We've done a lot of projects, including the high school project, where we've managed to keep it within the requirements of that project scope and budget agreement, and we fully intend to do that here. So that's the best I can tell you. Can I guarantee that it won't? Absolutely not. Nobody can guarantee anything in terms of this. It's a competitive business, and costs vary, and we've heard some of the discussion about that tonight. But we've had good results and good experience, and been through it a lot of times. So we're hoping that we're where we should be.
If I could just jump in, and as well, as far as the cost overruns, once the bonding and the financial agreement is signed, it's not that we all on the committee, or certainly myself as mayor, just sits back and hopes for the best, but having weekly meetings with contractors on site, as well as the consultants before us, looking at what may be going adrift and what we can do to stem that, as well as where there might be savings, to make sure that the project comes in exactly as designed and as we structured the finances of it.
Not to overburden this topic, but there are also a lot of safeguards that we build into a budget. There are contingencies. There are ways to address costs and check costs along the way. We will be doing not only this cost estimate that is coming up for the Project Scope and Budget Committee agreement, but there will also be estimates, 3 more estimates that are done before it even goes out to bid. So it is a constant process of trying to manage and anticipate what the costs are going to be, understanding what the current construction environment is.
Video surveillance.
Yeah, there was
Well, actually, just hopping onto that just for a sec. So, like, you know, if there's some unforeseen, like, oh, tornado hits in the construction during thing, you know, is there, like, I presume there'll be insurance to help cover, you know, acts of God or stuff like that? That's part of the process?
Right.
Okay.
There is. Yeah. Builders, it's called Builders Risk Insurance that is specifically designed and bought to address those kind of natural disasters, if you will. So yes, I mean, it's a normal sort of process, particularly for public construction, that those sorts of things are built into the process, yes.
So those wouldn't be a cause of the cost overruns he was asking about?
No, that would not be
Okay.
one of the things for a cost overrun. No, that would not be.
So the video surveillance system, it does keep a record, but not indefinitely. That's usually on a loop, and depending on how many cameras, the quality of the image that they want, the size of the server that they want to purchase, there'll be a limit. It's not an unlimited storage of what's captured on video. It's usually just enough to make sure that if somebody does something to the school overnight or comes in, there's a record of it. The exact parameters as far as how long that information will be stored is a variable until we know more about what the school requirements are going to be. But obviously it's recording to be useful, so it'll be kept for its useful period, and then it's discarded, and it's kind of a loop. The data writes over onto the video server.
And there are laws that protect student privacy, so people do not have access to those videos.
And the server's here. It's not. The video's available at the police dispatch, but it's a monitor basically that they have there, so that they can be aware of real time of what's going on at the school in the event that there's an incident. The dispatcher's got other things to do than to watch the students here, but if the school goes into a lockdown or some kind of a security threat occurs at the school, the police department will be immediately notified as soon as the lockdown initiation is started. And at that point, officers will be dispatched here, and the dispatcher will be able to see what's going on. That's what it's kind of turn there as far as the way the police department operates, but that's my understanding, and that's what the system we're looking at is intended to do.
My name is Georgia Garofaldi, and I'm fairly new to Easthampton. I've only lived here for 20 years. You can't hear me? I thought I had such a strong voice. My name is Georgia Garofaldi, and I'm fairly new to Easthampton because I've only lived here for 20 years.
Welcome.
Thank you. This is the first forum that I've attended, and I just want to say how impressed I am with everyone and all the work and the time and the effort that you've done for this everybody that worked on this deserves a round of applause. My question is, what are you going to do to sort of campaign for this over the next few months before the vote? Or you really don't have to tell me. I just hope you're going to do something, yes or no?
Here comes Deb. Deb's the campaign manager.
No, she's not.
Thank you for asking that question. I'm Deb Lusnia, and I'm speaking now as a resident, not as a school building committee member. But as a resident, we have established a ballot question committee in our city called Building Easthampton's Future. And there's a group of us, about 35, that have been working actively. And our goal is to educate the community about this project, to answer questions as well, to really encourage people to support the project and vote yes on May 22nd. And we have a little table out here where we have some information, and we would love to have additional volunteers helping us with that effort. We have a lot of things planned, and we'd love to have more help to make all that happen. So if any of you would be inspired to help us out, we'd love to have your name and your contact information, and please stop by at that table and talk to us. Thank you.
back to, I know that you mentioned on Facebook a couple times about the people on record that are getting a fee for this and that there may be some inherent bias, but I'd like to point out that myself, I'm a professional engineer, licensed in electrical engineering, not structural or architecture, but all engineers on these types of projects are going to have professional engineering licenses or architecture licenses, and they're putting their careers on the line for what they stamp on drawings or approvals. So they don't have a conflict of interest, because if they do something that's nefarious or wrong, they're going to lose their entire career and what they're going to do for the rest of their life, because nobody will hire them again. So I just want to let everybody know that it's a very rigorous 8-year process on some engineering to even take multiple tests. You have to get approved, licensed, and go through ethics for all this. So I just wanted to clear up about people that are on engineers of record. Yes, they're getting a fee, but they also have to be bound by other licensures and approvals by the state.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Connie Dawson, and I've lived here for a year and a half, so not so long. But I have a question, a follow-up to number 18, and this thing is getting very long, and I appreciate the amount of time someone is spending to answer questions. I also appreciated the 1,058-page report that you made available to us, and I actually did open it. I didn't read all of it, however. But I have a question about the heating, which is, in that report it says that there will be well, I'm confused. Will there be an alternate geothermal system, or is it just that that would be an alternative to the gas-fired HVAC system?
So that will be really when we're structuring the bid documents and actually at the very early stages of that, because we need to know a decision by the building committee. But I think that that's just demonstrating that there is an alternative source, the geothermal.
Would they both exist, or
no? It would be one or the other. And I think that what we did is those are very efficient systems, but they're very expensive systems to put in. So we wanted to make sure that people understood that we didn't just look at the easy answer with the natural gas, because you've got gas going to the site now. That we looked at the sustainability and all of those issues that surround it. The efficiency of a geothermal system is tremendous. The payback is very long on that.
True. There are some other issues for this community, however, because the gas company wants to expand and build new pipelines, and I fear that one of their arguments will be, well, you got this new school here, we're going to let them build it, it's an existing source, but this is one more argument for why we need the existing pipelines, to say nothing of the fact that both at the state and national level there's a movement to have carbon fees, which will mean that gas is going to become a lot more expensive. Which are, I think there's an argument to be made to consider doing this to save our climate and save the children we're building the school for.
Mm-hmm. So all I really have for that is that the natural gas consumption at the middle school now has been looked at in the proposed systems and the efficiency of the systems that we're putting in. We won't be increasing the volume of gas that's required to run Whitebrook right now with the new building, even though it's considerably larger. There's actually a gas moratorium where you can't bring new gas service in the area. And because our projected volume of usage or our demand is at or below what Whitebrook is now, it's just a transfer of the existing service. So it's not really responding to your look ahead for the environment.
I'm sorry, maybe one more question.
Yep.
Well, I just wanted to, is the geothermal heating system still in a possibility, or has it been ruled out at this point?
It hasn't been completely ruled out, but I think that with the cost that, we've got the $109 million, that'll certainly be a factor.
So do you have, I'm not trying to harass you, I'm going to vote for it. I'm just, do you have the number differential between the two heating systems?
As a cost, right now, at the phase that we're in, none of the systems have been designed in any kind of detail that would give us real numbers on that. They're all based on square footage of the building. We do have a square footage cost for what the the proposed system, the natural gas system is, and our engineers have given us a ballpark figure on what the geothermal would cost. They know the number of wells it would take. They haven't just said, well, geothermal is an efficient system. They've really looked at it and said, okay, for a building this size, how many wells would it take to support the school, and what's in their professional capacity?
Well, I'm just asking what is
I don't know the number off the top of my head.
Is that, do you think, I mean, I'm not asking for a
this
design of it, but I'm just curious what we're talking about in terms of the difference.
This is the kind of question that we can certainly follow up with and put onto the question and answers that are posted on the website.
I don't know if anybody else is concerned
but
about
this. That's exactly the kind of question that we have no problem kind of pursuing and putting the answer onto the school's website for you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, my name is Maren Goldstein. I'm one of the school building committee members. One of the things I just wanted to mention after some of the comments that have been said is this sort of the question of transparency. One of the things that I want to make really clear is that a number of our committee meetings are televised. They are available online for you to watch. All of the information, like we've said, is available on the website. You can read there. All of our upcoming meetings are public meetings. Anybody can come and attend them. So you are welcome to come if you have more questions, if you have more really that want to be more involved, get into the deep details that all of us spend our hours and hours into. You are welcome to come to our meetings. So please don't feel like we're holding anything back from you. We are trying to distill all these down into these forums so that you don't have to spend all the hours that the rest of us spend. But we are very concerned about money. We're very concerned about the best for our schools and our communities, and that's what we're doing in coming with this one best option for our community, and that's what we're asking for you to vote for on May 22nd. Okay, but don't feel like we're holding anything back. You are welcome to come to our meetings. You are welcome to watch our videos of our meetings, and you are welcome to ask any questions that you want. Please, thank you.
Hello, I'm Don Haywood. I have a 7-year-old that goes to Maple, so I agree we need a new school. And you answered my question about the independent review, but will that happen before or after we go to vote on this?
That happens after. That happens during the design phase. Schematic design is the next phase that we're going into, and that concludes in July. And even at that, the structural members of the building aren't sized and calculations aren't done. We just kind of describe what the structural system is going to be for the building. It'll be a steel frame building. They'll talk about the lateral resistance force systems that they're going to put into it. So until we get to design development and the construction documents, it happens actually pretty far into the process because they want to see that the independent engineer wants to see the calculations, he wants to see the size of the beams that we're putting in the connections and make sure that the way it's designed meets the current codes and it is going to be structurally sound. So right now we're just too diagrammatic in the information that we've got.
The other question I had was if any thought had went into the students that attend the school now, where the work will be done, because I know with construction, with the noise, I would have a hard time doing work, so is this going to affect the students for 2 years? And on the security aspect, have you guys looked into like remote keep, so the teachers can remotely lock the doors that way? They don't have to go and just...
I guess I'm not clear on your question. Are you talking about security, or are you talking about...
Well, it was 2 questions, actually.
Oh.
So one, could we get the teachers a way to remotely block the door? Yeah, the classroom, yeah. And then...
and the disruption is your other question?
Yeah.
It's always disruptive. We've done a lot of projects where we've done these new buildings outside of an existing operating school. It's always a concern, and clearly we take a lot of precautions to make sure that construction activities are divided, are separated, and there's barriers and all that sort of stuff. Actually, the kids really enjoy, watching the construction in that regard. A good example actually is when we did the high school. Like I say, the new building was actually built, 12 feet away from the existing building. It can be done. I think perhaps Superintendent Fowlsby could address how successful that was, but I think we came away with a very positive attitude in that regard.
Yes, and when the construction company comes in, they take great care with safety and security. The areas are fenced, you can't get in or out, and all of the construction workers who might have any kind of access to our schools have to have a query check, a criminal records check. So there's a lot of care taken about security in a situation like this. We didn't have any issues at all when we were building the new high school right on top of the old high school. And it didn't seem to be a problem in terms of distraction with our students as well. And maybe one advantage of Whitebrook Middle School, which we've never seen as an advantage, is that many of our classrooms have no windows to the outside.
As far as the locking doors, that's something that we're looking at. There's typical classroom hardware is made so they can be quickly locked, and with the classroom wing doors being able to close to prevent an intruder from getting into the classroom wings or slow them down at the very least, that's a measure. But we're also looking at how can teachers, how can the response time from an incident, if a teacher sees something that's already in the classroom wing, occur? How can we improve the response time to lock the building down? And so that's part of what we're looking at, and part of my discussions with the police department last week is there a way to automate that so it's not a teacher, giving a verbal shout and then having to call the office on the phone to ask them to start, contact the police department and start a sequence. We're looking at technology that will speed that whole process up so it's a one-step reaction to initiate the process. So.
My name is Michael Garsh, and I've been here since '90, and I agree with that newcomer that's only been here 20 years about the work that's been done. I came with mixed feelings, and I feel better, except for one thing that hasn't been addressed, which is why I'm up to speak. If you don't pay your taxes in any city, eventually the city attaches a lien. That lien allows the city to seize the property, sell it, and put you out on the street. There's a good segment of our population in Easthampton that are fixed income individuals, just living off of Social Security, barely, and who knows what's happening with Social Security around the world. They're absolutely frightened, and they're voting against this. So I think you need to address that if you want to switch a large voting bloc towards this school and convince me that I shouldn't have mixed feelings and vote for it for sure. And so I would just ask, is there anybody from City Council still here? Right, okay. Owen? Yeah, sorry. So I would like to ask this. I don't want to see elderly people put on the street, rolled out of their homes in their wheelchairs, and left to figure out what to do because they can't afford to pay the additional taxes of this school to educate children that they don't have. So what I would like to do is ask the city councilor whether you would be willing, before the vote, to file a resolution before city council, which you all unanimously voted for the school, guaranteeing that no senior resident will have a lien attached or be removed from their home if they can't afford to pay the school portion of the tax that will arise. So these people will know they're not going to be put out on the streets. There's a number of places that money can come from. The money can come from an additional small tax by the broad city to subsidize those fixed income citizens. That's one possible. Two, I know everybody thinks there can be a lot of money from cannabis. That money could be dedicated first to those senior citizens. Three, there could be a waiver on that component, the school component of the tax, so that if the citizen, the fixed income individual can't pay that component, and only that component, they're not going to lose their home. Four, we have a couple of banks in town. Oh, Tom, hi. You have a community benefit requirement, and you have audits that are done every year because the banks are required to support the community somehow. Would you be willing to sit down with maybe John Heaps, too, and determine whether you can set aside a certain fund to pay those taxes for those individuals, and I don't know how much the money is. I don't know if it's $100 grand a year or if it's only $50 grand a year. But to pay that or provide non-interest bearing loans that will be paid when the home is sold, so these people know that they're not going to lose their home. So would you be willing to file that resolution, sir?
I'd have to find some more information out before I could proceed, to be honest with you, sir. But it's absolutely something that we've been talking about, we've been looking at. It's attaching lease to homes is outside of the purview of the city council. I'd have to defer the mayor for some of her opinion on that. I know it's something we all been working on. I researched some state law recently that I've talked to the mayor about and the finance director, the treasurer, and got some really great information back after we did a lot of research about something that on its face I thought more seniors in our community should be employing, but that is actually has a terrible effect on most people that look for that kind of property tax deferment. And I learned a lot just in the last week or two about that specific state law, and it's something that as a city councilor, and I know the mayor's office and the finance director and the school building committee are all researching, because we definitely do not want to be pulling people out by the wheelchair and throw them on the street. I couldn't agree with you more about that.
Well, the ball's in this court then, Mayor. What do you think about that?
Thank you, Councilor Carey.
Oh, you're running for office.
With all due respect, Mike, I'm not sure it's fair to put anybody on the spot with those questions.
I never do that.
For an answer here tonight.
Okay.
Because all of those questions, including the bank, will require a lot of research, I assume. So I don't think asking Councilor Carey or the mayor for an answer on a resolution that we're not even sure it's legally permissible.
So let me step back a half a step. You make a good point. Are you willing to state an opinion or an intent? Are you willing to say, yes, we're going to do everything we can to make sure that doesn't happen?
I'll let the mayor speak, but she said that
I'll
already.
repeat the intent I've had from the very beginning of this process when I took office, is that I will work to make this as affordable as I can for all members of the population, and due respect with seniors. They're not alone in those concerns. I mean, I've spoken to young families and folks who, are just starting out their careers, and they hold those same concerns. I think that there are programs now and options for seniors and different groups of citizens to help with offsetting tax burden. And I would encourage those folks to look at those options now in our finance department. But going forward, looking at something creative to offset costs in a fair, equitable manner. Of course, I have a strong intent, and I'm happy to repeat it again today.
And do you think there may be a possibility of creating some entity within the finance structure so that individuals, because a lot of these folks don't want to get out of the house and go down and deal with the bureaucracy, to kind of make that easier for them to do? I think it's a good suggestion on your part. I think it needs to be easy for them.
I think it's a great suggestion, and it has been. As Councilor Carey mentioned, there were a couple of options that were brought forward to both of us and members of our finance team that looked very promising for seniors, those over the age of 65, that had pretty significant detrimental effects on their property values as well as their estates. And we were surprised at that, quite honestly. We thought it was a really great option, and I think that there are other things to look into that we are, and seeing what we can offer again. And there are some existing programs now that are available, not much used, but getting the word out there, but also looking at those long-term impacts.
Okay, thank you. And Tom, are you willing to say that you're seriously enough interested to really examine the possibility to see how you can help?
Sure.
Thank you.
Easy for me to say.
I will take you at your word. I know you well enough. So
I will say, though, that that's part of the reason why the mayor is looking at so many different funding options, bonding options for this program, because there are options that could make it a less of an impact out of the gate, between 20-year, 30-year hybrid, and that's why I think the mayor and the finance team are looking at so many different options what's the most we can do to mitigate it. Forget for a moment about the future and how we might have to help people who find they have a problem paying their taxes. How do we make it as least impactful as we can out of the gate?
I think if you took a good step towards that before May 22nd, so that our seniors and those on fixed incomes, some of them are seniors but they're working, if you move toward it, you might find you have a lot easier time getting across the school and getting the vote you need. Thank you. Appreciate it.
I'll try to make this real quick. You hear me okay? I'm Jeremy Raposa. I've been a resident since '01. The last speaker just addressed some of the things I had a concern about. I think you guys did a great job, and definitely for the project, but everyone that I know that would consider not voting for it, huge concern of just spending an extra $1. So all the metrics you put up I thought were really good. One of the questions I had, though, I was trying to project the questions they would have, would be, if there's maybe there's a master plan with the city, or what's the books going forward, what are the certain bonds or bills that go away? I don't know if that helps sell the project, and what the projection is of the city's expenses for the next 10 to 15 years, if you can project that beyond what you showed in the presentation. Maybe I missed it.
Oh, yes.
I didn't see every presentation you've had, so maybe I'm already stated something's already been talked about.
It's been addressed a little bit. So as far as what the bonding structure looks like, certainly it really goes hand in hand with our debt structure. So for instance, our public safety complex just came off of the books. We have the high school, but we have other debts incurred to improve the city that have to be taken into account when we're looking at how we bond, what the product looks like, and not only to make it affordable on day one for the immediate tax impact, but what we look forward to as far as revenues and cost assessments of property. Department of Revenue on their website has like a very basic tool to kind of figure that out. It's fun to play with if that's what makes you smile. And as well, we're going to have more information going forward. And our finance director and I have been talking about that a lot with Bond Council.
Okay.
Of what fits best.
And then the other one is hopefully to quickly address, if I don't know if the lady is still here, about the geothermal. I'm a registered professional engineer. Not part of the project, but I know many of the consultants on the project, and it's typical to have an alternate. I specialize in energy and on the mechanical side for a building, and do energy modeling. So it is geothermal is a very efficient system. It's normal to look at it, but it's very expensive in the current climate. There's not the same government money that there used to be. So I don't know.
You need to build to put in
Geothermal now compared to 10 years ago is much. When we budgeted on our own projects, I'm talking as a resident of the town now, not as an engineer.
Or to operate.
So to install geothermal is not getting, and on the projects that I see, is not getting installed nearly as much as it used to. I think it's federal. It has something to do with things. I'm not on the finance side. I'm a mechanical engineer. I get the nuts and bolts of the engineering. I'm not a principal. I'm not a project manager. But I just want to help explain it. You're right. It's a very efficient system, but the codes in the state is a stretch energy code town system. You could have zero energy building, but you got to spend for it. So there's always a budget you got to build to. So I can be confident that the consulting engineers that are in this job are going to look at the most efficient system for the budget to be within budget.
But there is still a question of climate and the future.
Those are bigger questions.
Carbon
You can't solve the world with every project. So
But the concerns are with the installation costs, not the operating costs, right?
I thought I'd add a little bit of information that why it might not get chosen is it's much more expensive to install because of incentives that I know of compared to maybe 5-10 years ago. And we are a stretched energy code town, and we have to hit very high standards just to begin with. And the consultants that are on the project, we're aware they're competitors of ours. We're aware they do consulting. I know so many engineers are very good, and they will do a good job for the town, for the city. And they're going to look at all options, and there's a lot of other things out there to save energy, and I know it's natural gas and it burns and it creates pollution, but that's a separate.
Suggesting that I don't think that you're doing a very good, competent job. I just am asking
No,
about
I understand, and I think that we can certainly follow up on your question about the, an order of magnitude cost comparison. It is the upfront installation costs that are prohibitive, and we evaluate that against the life cycle cost, what it's going to cost to operate the system, and then we determine what the payback is on that and whether it's a viable solution financially or not. And then there's the whole environmental side of it. But we can at the very least answer your question about ballpark figures and where the two different systems compare. So.
Hi there. My name's Ingrid Flory. I've lived here 17 years. I have 2 kids in the schools. I want to make a brief comment and then, I guess, an offer. So there's such a need for this project. My kids have had a great experience in Easthampton schools, and it's despite the facilities. And I have a child with special needs who's been particularly impacted by the facilities that we are doing our best to adapt and to make work. We have 2 elementary schools, one that doesn't have an elevator at all, one that has an elevator that only goes to 2 of the 3 floors. There aren't bathrooms that are easily accessible. Kids have to go down 2 floors to get to the nearest bathroom. My son's now at Whitebrook, and it's a highly distractible environment when you don't have walls that go to the ceilings. He comes home with wet socks some days when it rains, because when he's changing his clothes, the floors are wet. And so I guess part of my point is that as a parent with children with special needs, we often have certain insights. And when we built the high school, I was involved with our Special Education Parent Advisory Council. And those parents had some great ideas, and we got them in too late to really have them incorporated into that building project. So I'm trying to come early this time, and I'm offering, our PAC is not very formalized right now, but I'm encouraging you to seek out some input from parents with kids with special needs, because a lot of the ideas that we might have will benefit all students, and particularly those with disabilities. And I'd be happy to partner with you and help organize such an input session. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sarah Amoroso. I am a resident of Easthampton for probably 12 years, and I have 3 little boys at Maple, one of whom has some special needs himself. My concern that I'm seeing is I see this term 21st century education used a lot in your presentations and in your materials. And what I want to know, and I want other people to know, is why should we value it? What is the difference between the education that the children are receiving now and this 21st century education, excuse me? Why is it important? How can it support our children? And how might it be different from people who maybe went to school some time ago? And how should they understand the term, and how should they value it?
So I can start. I think probably the easiest example for everyone is technology. In the 1800s, our schools did not have the technology that we have today. And our children, when they graduate from our schools, are going to go into careers or onto higher education, where technology will be part of what they will need to know how to be very comfortable with, very facile with. And we do the best we can right now to provide an atmosphere in our schools and in our classrooms that's technology rich, but we are not able to do nearly what's possible in a new school, our high school being an example. It felt like we went from ancient times in our old high school to the modern world when we moved into this high school. So many more advantages to our students in terms of graphics education, in terms of learning how to use computers as second nature, As you probably know, the state testing system now is requiring computer accessibility, and that our kids understand how to use it, and as part of their instruction, as an instructional tool. So that's probably the biggest, easiest example. But another example that I would give is collaborative learning and problem solving. And right now our classrooms aren't built to support that kind of collaborative learning where we can get our kids into small groups, into multiple groups. I think that you saw the classroom diagram with flexible furniture. We don't have any of that now. So we're really trying to, overcome a lot of obstacles to give our children the kind of education that will prepare them for what comes after graduation and will prepare them for our high school, which, as you know, is technology rich and has all of these opportunities. So those are just a couple of examples. Well, here's another one. I probably could go on and on, but I don't want to take too much time. Outdoor learning. We don't have opportunities for that. And that's something that I think is a real shame, that our students don't have those opportunities. We have our garden programs, and they're wonderful, but as you know, they're very contained because we have very small spaces that are green. We would have access to the environment for science projects and inquiry projects, so I think that would be a huge benefit for our children in a new environment at Whitebrook. So those are just some examples.
Could I just tag on to that? Around 21st century education and what this building brings, the difference is, and I think the mom left, but her children received a great education in spite of the physical plant that they were educated in. And I think when we're talking about 21st century, we're talking about building in space that really unleash not just the potential of our students, but also our teachers. I can't imagine what it's like to teach in Maple Street and think about how I'm getting my student from point A to point B, how everyone will be able to access, say, a life science lesson or a U.S. history lesson, and putting that into a lesson plan on top. So I see a new school embracing 21st century ideas of what a learning space can be and what it should be to address the needs, but also access as many different types of learners as possible. I'd also speak to 21st century education as one that accommodates and gives students and staff a really healthy environment. It's easy to look back and say, oh, well, we know this material's not suitable now. What we've seen in the building plans to date, and I expect to see more and more of it, are materials that we know don't aggravate or cause existing issues, maybe respiratory or bronchial issues, but also we know that are healthy and conducive to people in general. And bringing our kids and staff forward in that sort of environment. Lastly, the flexibility of the space, how it relates to what folks are thinking about for job markets, folks who are going to be job ready, college ready. We need a physical space that can flex to what's going on right now, and that's connectivity to wireless devices and what's coming at us that we don't know. And I see that in this design, a lot of flexibility going forward into a new century of learning.
Not to belabor it, because we've gone on a while about this, but the thing that I think about that hasn't been mentioned as well is how curriculum has changed between when schools were constructed 100 years ago and now.
And how students have changed.
And some of the things that don't exist in some of our buildings. Health and fitness. Maple School does not have a gymnasium. Library media centers don't exist in some of the elementary schools. Performance space for students. All of those kinds of spaces that some of the elementary schools have and don't, but should be available to all students so they can experience the full breadth of curricular offerings in the 21st century.
And I would just add that I do have an education background, and even with my own education, I did not really appreciate until I was a parent of a student who receives IEP services how comprehensive, how different they are than other people think, and how effective they can be in taking a student that would perhaps otherwise have been on a more marginal track and to become perhaps even college ready. So, and it's a large percentage of our students that people, I don't have the number, but I think people are often surprised when they hear things like that number. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Patty Benson. I'm going to be very brief. I just wanted to circle back around to traffic because I also live on Park Street. And I just wanted to say the way I look at it is we have 4 schools right now. All of them cause traffic snarls. None of them have adequate parking. None of them are particularly pedestrian friendly. And now with one school, finally the city, the police department, the school department can all work together to calm and mitigate that problem and maybe finally solve the speeding on Park Street. So I see this as the silver lining and yet one more benefit to this amazing project and the way this is going to benefit Easthampton. Thank you.